Right, so today I want to talk about this story from the Post Millennial, and it's titled Alberta Unemployment Rate for Young Men Hits 20%. And yes, you've seen that right, that is a very staggeringly high amount. Um, and personally, I am in that 20%, so it is a little bit personal for me. And I mean, if you're from Alberta, you probably know someone in that 20%, so it should be personal for everyone from Alberta, at least. Um, According to Statistics Canada, over the last few months, the province has seen the rate of unemployment for young men shoot up from 1 in 10 to 1 in 5, meaning that roughly 20% of Alberta young men have become jobless. The gender split between men and women for job loss has largely been due to the drop in oil and gas sector, an area commonly dominated by men. And the first thing I wanted to point out too is number one, the unemployment rate for young men has doubled since April, and then that's what 7 8 months, like that's staggeringly high. And um, there's a lot of aspects to this. The first point I wanted to bring up is that can we stop pretending that sexism is what majority women or men don't face sexism nowadays, because it's so annoying and such a lie, and it really bothers me. If 20% of young women were unemployed right now, it would be a national story. It would be the biggest story. Justin Trudeau would be all over it, even if it's just in Alberta, and society would be forced to bend over backwards to fix it. But when it's young men, there isn't even stories on it. Not only are people not bending over backwards to help fix it, like no one even cares. And like when you search this stuff, the CBC, CTV, any of the mainstream outlets, you don't see it. They don't care. And it's something that really bothers me, because it's something that's a complete lie and backwards think in society that people hear nowadays, and I mean still nowadays, that sexism always faces women, or almost always faces women, or is faced by women. And in reality, it's the exact opposite. And the simple way of putting it, I would say, is that if you were looking at a society and trying to figure out which gender faces the most sexism, the easiest way to tell would be to look at the gender that, when they have a legitimate gripe with society, which one is not heard, which one's problems are ignored by society. And when you think of that in society nowadays, no one in the right mind can make the argument that that's women. Like whenever they have a problem, they even have fake problems like the gender pay gap that aren't even real, that are completely made up. And yet society still bends over backwards to help them. And you have problems like this that specifically men face, and no one cares. So that's the first point I wanted to bring up, is that as a society we need to fix this, because when the difference between men and women generally between this kind of stuff is that when young men when bad things happen like this, young men generally just withdraw from society and just watch it burn, which is why you have so many young men nowadays that aren't working, play a lot of video games, stay home, still live with their parents into their late 20s, all this kind of stuff. And some of them it's because they're losers, yeah, but a lot of them it's because it's not worth it. Like the amount they have to put in to get even a small amount out of society it's insane. Like you got to put so much more in than you get out, that they think, and I mean I would disagree, but I think they have much reason to believe this, is that it's not worth it. And that's what's happening nowadays. And the first thing is that the unemployment rate doesn't include people that aren't currently looking for work. So the actual number is much higher than this. The unemployment rate only counts people that are actively looking for a job. I think it's within the last month. So let's say you someone who you're unemployed, you want a job, but maybe you've been looking for a few months, and you're like, you know what, this isn't even worth it anymore, and you stop looking for a month. Well, you're no longer quote unquote unemployed. So the actual number here is a lot higher. It's probably like 30 to 40%, I would guess. Maybe not that high. I'd probably like 25, 30. And So that's the one thing I would point out too, is that the actual number is actually higher than this. So that's kind of the one thing I would point out too, is that if we want to improve society, I think something that no one really talks about, even on the right, is that we have to stop pretending that sexism is just women's suffering. It's so annoying, and anyone who ignores this kind of stuff, it just goes to show that you don't actually care. And I mean, the majority of people, I mean, the overwhelming majority of people don't care. So anybody who ever talks about sexism but ignores stuff like this, ignores stuff like, men are the overwhelming majority of homeless, men make a lot more money than they get out in, taxes, women take out a lot more than they put in, all this kind of stuff. If you just ignore stats like that, and you bring up fake stuff like the gender pay gap, or the whole, women aren't as many STEM graduates, even though they decide through their own free will not to do that. But if you're ignoring this kind of stuff, then you don't care about sexism. And I mean, the overwhelming majority of people don't. They just do it to virtue signal. And I guess that kind of is what it is. The other point to bring up here is that expecting the federal government to do something about this it's going to fall on deaf ears. I don't know how many times I have to say it, and people like me have to say it. They're not going to do anything, because the federal government, they're on the left, they're liberals. I mean, a lot of the other provincial governments are on the left as well. So expecting other provinces to have sympathy for us is the same as expecting the feds to have sympathy for us. And it's not going to happen. It's been falling on deaf ears for a handful of years now, and it's going to keep falling on deaf ears, because expecting them to care about us is expecting them to go against their own self-interest, because politically their own self-interest is more left, is more government power, is more regulations, is more taxes. And as Albertans, specifically young men, white men, the average oil, I would say, probably 80 to 90% of oil and gas workers are on the right, or at the very least not on the left. Maybe they're moderates, but they're not on the left. So these young men, me included, our own self-interest is to have less government, is to have less taxes, is to have less regulations, specifically the regulations, and is to have less government power, basically. And that's what would go in our own self-interest, and which is the exact opposite of what the federal government wants, and what most of the other provinces want. So like I said, expecting it to change is expecting people to go against their own self-interest, which is, I would say, pretty much insane. Like, literally, that's insane. Which is why the federal government has such scorn for Alberta and Saskatchewan. And specifically, which is the same reason why they have such scorn for men and white men and all these kind of things, is that people always, they're wondering, like, why do they do this? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. It's very simple. They don't agree with them politically. Like, it's very simple. And the people that don't understand that kind of stuff, they want to assume that people are good. Like, maybe we disagree politically, but we still want the same thing. Which is something I cannot stand when people say that, because we don't. We couldn't disagree more on a lot of things. It's not that we just have this small disagreement. Like, no. Especially in their minds too. Like, the left doesn't say that. Like, it's always the people that are more apolitical that have this idea that we have our small little disagreements, but in the end we still want the same thing. Like, no, we couldn't differ more when it comes to a lot of things. Like, most people on the left want massively high taxes, want a massively big and powerful government. And when you're, the average conservative, or Alberta conservative especially these young men, they don't want massive regulations, because massive regulations mean they're out of a job. And if they have a job, it means that they're going to make less money, and they're probably going to have to spend more time making the money they're currently making. And to me, it's going to fall on deaf ears. And the point I just wanted to get across here is that if you're someone from Alberta and you're still waiting on the feds to do something to help us out, what more is it going to take? Like, it's not going to happen. Like, Edmonton unemployment, I think, is about 8%. I think Calgary's about 7.5%, which is 2 or 3% more than the national average. Like, it's not going to change. And people say, "Oh, let's like." There's some people that look. Let's elect an NDP government in Alberta. Like, did you see how that worked last time? And people say, well, the economic numbers, I mean, they weren't terrible. Well, when you actually dig deeper, they are terrible because they massively, I mean, I think literally 10 times the amount of debt they brought in. And all they did to solve the problem was they through bringing in all that debt, they hired a bunch of public sector workers. Most of those jobs are completely pointless. That's what their solution to it was, is just massively increase. Let's just pay people to do jobs that don't actually need to be done and finance it through debt. Like, that would be the equivalent to me, being someone who, let's just say you're someone who, you're struggling to get by, and your solution to it is just to write yourself a check. Like, that's what the NDP did. So they're not going to do anything. The provincial Conservatives have their hands tied to a degree. I think they could definitely be doing a lot more, but I think that I think they genuinely, I mean, they have to know that if they don't, like Jason Kenney and all them, like, they have to know that if they don't do at least a decent job in Alberta, they're not going to get, I mean, they'll probably get reelected, but their support's going to go down. They're going to have an even tougher time getting things through. And, I mean, a lot of them, too, that their goal in their career is to, I mean, Jason Kenney, the rumors going around, I mean, I don't know if they're true or not, but he wants to be prime minister someday. Like, if he doesn't do a good job in Alberta, he's not going to become prime minister. So all these people's arguments against that, it doesn't really make any sense. And now I don't really want to go too into the Alberta politics part of it, so I'm going to leave it there. If you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.